So welcome everyone. My name is Marinka Rojas Gorgon. I'm with the San Jose chapter of the National Association of Asian American Professionals. Welcome to everybody. This is being recorded and we'll have the recording available to all of you so you can refer to it later on as you need to. We've got a number of our leadership team members here, but let me go ahead and pass it over to Noel Blanco, who will talk a little bit about NAP San Jose, and then we'll introduce Ryan.
Hello, hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm Noel Blanco, and I am the Chief Communications Officer for NAP San Jose, and I am one of your hosts today for our Storytelling 101 series. And this will be a monthly event. I'll go into that in just a minute with events, but NAP San Jose has been around for 6 years now, Marinka? Is it 6 or are we at 7? I think it's 6, yeah, as a chapter. So if you are a member with us currently through your company or just popping in, we are happy to have you as a member. And if you're interested in membership, we will be happy to talk to you about that as well. As a national organization, NAP, the National Association of Asian American Professionals, we've been around since 1982, and it was created as one of the first Pan-Asian associations started after the Vincent Chin murders. So as a chapter, we do chapter events. As a national team, we do huge national events. So we are super excited to have you here today and get to introduce you to NAP if you are not already familiar with NAP. And as I just said too, I keep saying that, National Association of Asian American Professionals, we do often call it in short form NAP, not to be confused with NAACP, but NAAAP. If you're hearing it for the first time. I want to make sure always our abbreviations are inclusive and understandable. So real quick about NAP San Jose, if hopefully you're already following us on our Facebook, Instagram, and or following our website, we will drop all that information into the chat periodically throughout the event. And again, at the end, upcoming events besides this network series. This network series currently is not on our calendar. We will be sending information after this event about the upcoming third Wednesday lunchtime for some, lunchtime if you're Pacific time, event that will be happening every month. So we will go into, Ryan will be going into how this will be working, but mark your calendars or mark your mind until we send the invite that the third Wednesday of every month from about 12 to 12:45, we will be having this series. And today would be just the intro event. Another event I will mention real quickly that is coming up for NAP San Jose is an in-person event, and that will be March, I'm blanking, 29th. We will be having our Hump Day monthly dinner event. That is something we do pretty much every month, and that's a great way to get together and just share amazing food. And we do limit the tickets to that one, or the reservation to that one, to about under 10, depending on the restaurant, so we don't completely overload restaurants, and also so that we can have really great quality versus quantity conversations. That one is live, that event, so if you'd like to sign up for that, we will drop that information in the chat as well. We would love to see your faces. I know we got to see a bunch of Del Monte people. I know we have some Del Monte people here at our last Lunar New Year dim sum event. So those are the two main events coming up. Our next storytelling series, third Wednesday of the month in April, and then this networking event, or prior, the networking event, the 29th, in-person monthly dinner. Did I forget anything, Marinka? I feel like that's as much as we can talk about right now.
I think you pretty much covered it. So let me go ahead and introduce Ryan. Ryan Takamiya is our presenter today. We've had the opportunity to work with Ryan quite a few times in the past. He is a professional presenter, and he is a vetted member of our Speakers Bureau. NAP Speakers Bureau, we do some pretty heavy reviews for anyone who is interested in joining. And Ryan has definitely been through the process, and we can vouch for his professionalism. And this isn't the only topic that he presents. He actually does quite a few different presentations for us and for also other organizations. So with that, let me turn the mic over to Ryan, and he can go do his thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Marinka and Noel. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today, for taking the time out of your day to be here. Again, my name is Ryan. I'm a writer, a speaker, a community organizer. But to really sort of give you a little bit, shed a little more light onto myself, I'm gonna, of course, tell you a story. Obviously, this is a storytelling workshop, so I'm going to start with a story. So here's my my little presentation. I'm going to show you. Can everybody see that? Let's see. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that on your screens there.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to start off our storytelling workshop by telling my own story, like a little quick 5-minute story here. And this story is about my Uncle Calvin. And I'm telling you a story about my Uncle Calvin because my Uncle Calvin loved to tell stories. He himself was an avid storyteller. He was a true raconteur. Not only did he tell stories, but he seemed to only really speak in stories, actually. The way he started most of his sentences was, "Hey, did I ever tell you about the time when I," every single time, basically. And, he was a really funny, really gregarious, outgoing guy. And his stories were always about funny things that happened to him, things that he thought that were interesting or outrageous, or something he just saw on TV recently. There were stories that were designed to entertain. He would laugh very loudly. He was very boisterous. Sometimes he would even dominate the conversation. This meant that he was great at parties, but the downside was that you could never really get to know him, get to know who he was, because in all the stories he told, he never would tell a story that showed any kind of real emotion. And, he would tell stories about things he liked or things that annoyed him, but never anything that really moved him in one way or the other. When it came to those types of stories, he would gloss over them or he would avoid the subject altogether. For example, for a significant portion of his life, he actually managed a restaurant that his father owned in San Diego. And I would ask him about that time in his life. He spent like 15 years managing a restaurant. But all he would ever tell me was that there were long, grueling hours that he worked day and night. And the most I could ever get out of him was a story or two about how somebody ran out on the bill and he had to chase after them and beat him up or something like that. But he never told me how he really felt about it. Another example is the fact that he actually was drafted into the war in Vietnam in the 1960s. And whenever I would ask him about that experience, that time in his life, all he would ever tell me was that it was tough and that it was no fun being shot at. And he would leave it at that. That's all he would ever say. And of course, I think he did this for numerous reasons. For one, he was old-fashioned. Men of his generation didn't talk about their emotions or show them, really. I mean, that was reserved for private moments, or not at all. But also he was Asian American, and that meant not wanting to, quote unquote, burden anyone with the heaviness of what he might be feeling, or even to quote unquote show off when he was particularly proud of something that he did. 5 years ago, my Uncle Calvin developed dementia, and slowly he unfortunately began losing his stories one by one. I spent some time with him as his caregiver and, desperately tried to get him to talk more about his life experiences and about his feelings. But despite knowing that his memory would disappear, he still skirted around any memory that would bring up a strong emotion or feeling. He would still only tell stories about things that were funny or trite. And slowly, all those stories that he never told, aka his feelings, what made him human, they disappeared and were gone forever. Now, I tell the story as if it happened a long time ago, but actually, the truth is that he just passed 6 weeks ago at the age of 74. And, if after all of that, it wasn't until after he died, talking with my older relatives, that I finally found out more about what he didn't tell me. That restaurant that he worked at, that just some restaurant that he worked at, that he downplayed and downplayed, it wasn't some ordinary hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. It was a large restaurant that was one of the first and one of the only two Chinese restaurants in San Diego at the time. And not only that, but it was wildly popular. It turned out he worked long hours because they were open for so long, because they did such great business. On weekends, there would be a line around the block, and he was probably extremely proud of his accomplishments running a successful and popular restaurant for so long, but I never knew it because he never talked about it. And as for his time in Vietnam, he served in something called the AmeriCal division, which I found out later on was one of the divisions that saw some of the heaviest and bloodiest fighting of the entire war in the summer of 1969. And he was actually injured during that offensive and took home a Purple Heart. And because of that little known fact that he didn't tell barely anyone, and that we finally found out after his death, he will actually get to be honored as a war hero with a full military burial at the end of this month. And I'm very proud to be able to say that he's going to get that. So basically, it wasn't until after death that I felt like I truly actually got to know my uncle a little bit. He avoided stories that would stir up emotion in him, good or bad. Instead, he tried very hard to entertain, which he did. He was successful at that. He tried very hard to make people laugh. But in doing so, he never let anybody in. Now that's my story about my Uncle Calvin. And that's the end of the story. But now what I want to do is I want to show you what exactly was happening as I was telling you that story. Because unbeknownst to you, as I was telling that story, I was altering your brain chemistry. Now here's where we get into the power of storytelling and the power that stories have. And I'm really excited for you all to be here, to be a part of this workshop and to be a part of this series, because I believe that stories are much more than just fun little things that you do at parties, or little things that we share with children. I believe stories are much more than that. I think actually stories are actually the way we communicate. And I actually believe that stories are not only vehicles for our emotion, but they are the most effective ways for us to connect and communicate with other people. And this goes against a lot of conventional knowledge surrounding communication, and especially communication in business, where we're told to stick to the facts, stick to the numbers, and don't show any emotion. But I'm going to prove to you today that by telling stories that are imbued with emotion, that is the only way to actually have a lasting impact on the people who are listening to you. Case in point, we'll start with the brain. So as I was telling you that story about my uncle, a bunch of things were going on in your mind. Now, there was no suspense in that story, but if I had told you a suspenseful story with a cliffhanger, that would have made your brain release the hormone dopamine. And dopamine, what dopamine does to the brain is it actually it makes you pay attention. It sits you up in your chair, and it increases your ability to remember things. If I had told you a funny story, a story with jokes, your brain would have released endorphins, which have the power to relieve stress, which give you kind of a little bit of a high. It's the same feeling that you get after a good exercise or after a good run. If I had told you a scary story, your brain would have released adrenaline and cortisol, which adrenaline, of course, as we know, makes you breathe faster, sends more oxygen to your lungs and therefore to your muscles, prepares you for action. Cortisol is a stress hormone, which makes you forget things. So this is why some people love scary stories, and why some people hate scary stories. And if I told you a story that was either happy or sad, and I think that my story about my Uncle Calvin is a little sad, your brain released oxytocin, which, as we know, is what's called the cuddle hormone, which is the hormone that prepares you to bond with the person that you're listening to. So I was changing your brain chemistry, but not only that, I was doing more. I was actually also kicking your memory into gear. Stories have the power to actually increase our memory of things, our ability to remember things. And this was proven in a study in 1969 at Stanford, where students were tested on their ability to memorize words. They were given 12 words and told to memorize those words in 2 minutes. But they're split into two groups. The first group was told to just memorize them the normal way, by rote memorization, by looking at the 12 words and just repeating them over and over in your mind and trying to memorize them. The second group, however, was instructed to take those 12 words and to create a narrative out of those 12 words, to create a story that contained all of the words. And guess what? Only 13% of the rote memorization group were able to remember all 12 words, whereas 93% of the group who created a narrative were able to remember all 12 words. Another fascinating thing that goes on when I tell a story, or when you tell a story, is that neurons fire in my brain and the same neurons fire in your brain. There's called mirror neurons. Basically, when I tell a story that involves a place or things or people, and as I imagine them in my mind, you are imagining them in your mind as well. When I showed you that picture of my Uncle Calvin, you were imagining this older Asian American man telling stories at a party, right? Because that's what I was imagining in my mind. You and I were having the same experience. This was also proven in a study in the 1990s, where they basically took two monkeys and they hooked electrons up to one monkey and had that monkey observe another monkey who was taking a banana and eating it. And they found that the neurons responsible for those motor functions, for grabbing a banana and eating it, were firing in the brain of the monkey that was simply observing, lending credence, finally, to the age-old adage of monkey see, monkey do. Basically, whatever, and this doesn't even need to be scientifically proven. We know this to be true because, you know, we experience this every day. When you see someone, you know, walking by you and they stub their toe and they recoil in pain and they go, ooh, ah, we almost recoil in pain as well. You watch it, you go, ooh, ow, that hurts, because we know exactly what that feels like and we can actually imagine it in our own minds. So stories engage these mirror neurons, and we basically go into a kind of shared imagining, or shared imagination, or shared hallucination of the story itself. We embark on this journey together, basically. And this is done through this wonderful thing of called synaptic strength, and the neurons that are firing in your brain. A wonderful thing that happens is that the neurons that fire become stronger, basically, and this has fantastic ramifications for the ability to actually rewire our own brains, basically. So what's going on when you tell a story, when you reach back into your memory and pull a story from your mind and you replay it in your mind, whether you retell it to somebody else or whether you tell it to yourself in the mirror or you're just telling it to yourself in your own mind, what happens is that the neurons that are responsible for telling that story, for replaying that memory, they fire. And every time they fire, they become stronger. Just like working out a muscle. Every time you use that muscle, it gets stronger, right? Neurons are the same. So it's kind of like, imagine two paths in a forest. The more you take the wider path, the more well-beaten path, the more you walk on that path, the wider it gets, the flatter it gets, the clearer it becomes in the forest, right? You can see it, like that path on the right of your screen there. And the less you take a path, if you ignore a path, the more that path becomes overgrown, right? Grass grows on it, trees cover it, nature takes it back, and it becomes harder and harder to find, harder and harder to see. Our brains are exactly the same. The more you think about something, and we know this to be true when we're learning something new, like learning a new language, the more you repeat something, the more you go to that thought in your mind, the more you practice it, right? The 10,000 hours you practice it, the more it becomes firmly established as a neural pathway in your brain. The same is true, and the opposite is true, right? When the less you return to a certain memory, or the less you practice something, the less you practice a language, the less you practice a skill, the more muddy and cloudy it becomes in your mind, and eventually you forget, right? So when you reach back into your mind and pull out stories to tell from your own personal experience, if you select the stories carefully, those stories that you select will become stronger and stronger the more you tell them. This has huge ramifications for self-esteem and confidence, because the more those stories that you decide to tell, those stories become your identity. They become who you are and help you understand yourself. And, I actually have a whole nother workshop on the difference between success stories and failure stories, and why we should sort of focus more on success stories, and how those stories will actually help us feel better about ourselves. But basically, the whole gist is that, that old story of, like, you've got two wolves, who are hungry. One wolf is a good wolf and one is a bad wolf. Which one do you feed, right? That's how your brain works. As we choose stories in our minds to tell other people, those are the ones that become us. Those are the ones that become our story. So be careful which stories you choose, right? So essentially, this is all to say that storytelling has incredible power. It has the power to help us bond with others. It has the power to contextualize us in the eyes of those who are listening to us. And it has this wonderful mirror effect where, when you express emotions, your listeners mirror those emotions back to you, and you receive positive reinforcement for the emotions that you felt, right? If you just felt those emotions alone in a vacuum, you would question yourself. You would wonder if it was really true. You would wonder what you felt. But by telling those stories and sharing those emotions with other people and having them reflected back to you, you develop a healthy, positive identity about yourself, and your experiences become validated. Now, all of that is well and good to know about the neurology about stories, but let's talk about how to actually structure one. How do you actually do it, right? We're not all born to be incredible writers and orators, but I believe that we are natural storytellers because we've been doing this, I think, for as long as we could speak. I think as long as language, as far back as language was invented, we've also been telling stories, and you have the power to tell stories yourself. You just need a little bit of structure, right? We all need a little bit of structure. So here are some basic structures that will help you, form your stories into a nice, neat little format. The first thing that they always tell you in a writing class or a storytelling class is that your stories must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's all well and good, but what does that really mean? That means that your story must follow a clear, logical narrative path. Stories must be logical. Things must happen, and then those things cause other things to happen. Those cause other things to happen until they get resolved. That's what they mean by beginning, middle, and end. And that's what I mean by a logical path, because our brains really only follow, logical paths. We don't like it when things sort of jump around illogically, or things come out of nowhere. And this is kind of why we don't really like it when people tell us about their dreams. Say, hey, I had this really weird dream last night, and they tell the story of their dream, and it's really strange. This is why dreams are so odd to us, because dreams don't make any sense. They go all over the place. They're full of non sequiturs and things that jump out of nowhere. So it's important that your story follow a linear path. It's important for it to have a beginning, middle, and end. And another way to think about the beginning, middle, and end is that the beginning is what we call a setup or an introduction. The middle is where things happen, conflict, obstacles, etc. And an end is where things get resolved. There's a resolution at the end. Another good way to think about it is to think about Freytag's triangle. And this is one of the basic story structures. This is essentially the same thing, but a little more detail on the beginning, middle, and end portion. Basically, the beginning, the setup, is filled with what we call exposition. Exposition is basically explanation, right? This is where you set the scene. This is where you tell everybody where the story takes place, or who are the characters and what they're doing. Then there's an incident that incites the characters into action. It moves them to start doing things differently, perhaps, or to go somewhere. And then, of course, your characters perform actions upon actions upon actions, reaching to a climax. At which point, then there are still actions, but they are less and less intense, until it reaches a final resolution or denouement. That's Freytag's triangle. But a more recognizable form of this story structure is something that's called the 3-act structure. And you're going to recognize this because this is the structure that is used for pretty much all media that we have today. So like literature, film, television, this is the structure that we see all the time, and is still the same structure as before, with a setup, conflict, and resolution. But this time they're broken into 3 acts, and acts are collections of scenes. And you'll notice here on this graph that the climax is actually sort of scooted a little more toward the end. And they do that for entertainment purposes, for suspense purposes. They want to draw you in by not giving away the whole climax and resolution until the very, very end of the film or of the book or of the TV show. And you'll recognize this, any sitcom you've ever seen starts off the same, where you see the characters in their usual place. Something happens, they all have to rush somewhere to go solve the problem. Things get out of hand until they finally solve it, and then they're all happy and back to where they started again in Act 3. Very, very common storytelling structure. The last storytelling structure I want to go over is the one for myths and legends. And this one is, I think, even more recognizable, and because it is a little more ancient. And I love this one because it actually has a very interesting backstory. The mythologist Joseph Campbell, about 50 years ago, he studied myths and legends from all around the world. And he realized that even though story structures varied greatly from culture to culture, there was one story structure that they all had in common, that almost every culture and community around the world had in common, even though they had no connection or were not speaking to each other, had no contact with each other. And he coined that, he called that story structure the hero's journey. And the hero's journey goes a little something like this. You might recognize that the hero, or the main character, starts off in a place of comfort, or a place familiarity, right, at home or in their home village, or just somewhere where they're comfortable. They are then called to adventure by something. Something happens, right, that calls them from their place that is known into the unknown, right? They cross the threshold into the unknown, at which point they are faced by numbers of trials and obstacles, but they also meet friends and teachers who will help them along the way. They solve those problems and obstacles in all the ways that they know how, until they meet a final obstacle or final boss or an abyss where they are unable to cross, an abyss that they are unable to cross, or an obstacle that they are unable to overcome by doing all the things that they used to do. At this point, this is a point in the story where they must change. They must change everything about themselves, and they must change the way they do things in order to cross the abyss or defeat the final boss. They change. They go through a metamorphosis in order to achieve their final reward, at which point they return home with that reward, or just return home having changed and share the things that they've learned with the people that they know and love. And you'll recognize this story structure from pretty much any movie that they tried to make. They use the story structure to try and make movies feel epic, to try and give it that mythical feeling to them. So, and all these huge movies that we recognize and love. But all that being said, all those story structures those are kind of the ones that we use for larger stories, for more literary stories. But your stories don't have to follow exactly those structures in order to be compelling. You don't have to sit down and write a novel in order to share a compelling story in 5 minutes. Basically, if you want to share a compelling story, it just has to have a few of the following elements. It's got to have a clear central message. While you want your story to be simple, you want your characters to be complex, because we like human characters that are complex and have flaws and complicated, maybe even contradictory even. But you want the story itself to be simple. You want to draw from your own personal experience, because that's going to make it more authentic to you. You want to take us on a journey somewhere. We always love going on a journey. We always love imagining new places. And don't be afraid to embrace conflict whenever there is, because conflict is real. Conflict is real life. So don't shy away from talking about times when things got hard, when you failed, or when you had some setbacks. And it's always nice to have some like aha moments, things that you learned, or things that were unexpected. We always love those moments in stories. But the most important thing if you want to have a story that has lasting impact, and you want to have a story, you want to tell a story that is really going to resonate with people, that's going to make people remember you, then don't just think about entertainment. This is where, you know, a lot of people, they think that, oh, I have to tell a story that's funny, or I have to tell a story that is, people are really going to like go on a fun ride, you know, but that's not true. I believe that in order to tell a story that really leaves a lasting impact on people, sure, you can tell an entertaining story, and there's space for those. There's entertaining stories that stick with us. But really what you want to tell is you want to tell a story that is true, a story that speaks truth. And what I mean by that is a story that speaks to the human existence. That's a story that speaks to humanity, to the humanity of what it means to be human, basically, right? And what it means to be human is successes and failures, setbacks, you know, challenges, right? Flaws, mistakes, you know, sadness, happiness. Basically, the most human thing you can have in your story, as I was saying before, is emotion, right? That is the most human thing that we have. That is what makes us human, is our emotions. And again, this flies in the face of a lot of what we've been taught about communication, especially in professional settings. But I believe that the more you can imbue your stories with emotion, the more you will activate all of those things that I was talking about before. Now, if you tell a story that's just pure entertainment, like my uncle did, you will get a few of those things that we were talking about. You'll get the hormonal release, you know, people will laugh, you know, they might remember you, you know, pretty well, memory enhancement, right? They might go on the journey with you, your story. But if your stories do nothing but entertain, you will not get the rest of all these things on the list. I believe it is only through emotional storytelling that we activate the emotional bonding that happens between people, the emotional validation that you feel as a storyteller, the identity building that goes on in your mind as you reinforce those emotions in your mind, that memory in your mind. I believe that you only become humanized and contextualized when you share those emotions, right? Otherwise, you become a performer, you become an entertainer, right? But as an emotional storyteller, you become a real human being to whoever is listening to you, and you achieve real, actual synchronicity with the person who is listening to you, right? You shed real tears. Oftentimes, your audience will shed real tears as well. Now, just as my Uncle Calvin, all he did was tell stories to entertain, and I never really got to know him, never really got to know him. I think about him every time that I tell a story now. I think about, well, what kind of story would help people get to know me? And these are the types of stories I hope you will tell us in the coming months. And this is why I really, really think this is such a valuable series for you to join. You know, just having this space where you can tell a story, where you can share with people, is incredibly, incredibly valuable. No matter how small or big it is, it doesn't have to be 500 people. It all has to be is 5 people. It doesn't matter, or just one person, really. The ability to tell your story and to share with someone. I mean, this is the basis of empathy, and this is a lot of what we do in therapy, right? But just being able to share and having that space is incredibly powerful. So, as Marinka and Noel was saying, we're going to do this every third Wednesday of the month from 12 p.m. to 12:45 PST. What we're going to do is that every month is going to have a theme, and you know, we're going to keep that theme kind of loose. And your interpretation of the theme, I think you can kind of interpret it how you want. It doesn't have to be very strict. Like if we say the theme is, you know, family, that can mean whatever you want it to mean. It doesn't have to be a story about your family or necessarily about family in general, but maybe it could be about a family member or something that happened when you were on a family trip. So take the theme, let it inspire you. Just let it, you know, come up with any story that it sparks. Sign up online beforehand. You'll get a 5-minute limit, and we'll try and cap it to 8 to 10 storytellers in that 45 minutes. It's very tough to get any more than that if everybody's got 5 minutes. Please try and stick to 5 minutes if you can. We will record these sessions, and we will really encourage people to keep their cameras on as you listen to other people's stories and as you tell your own. I know it's difficult sometimes to sort of reveal yourself in that way, but this is the work. This is what we're trying to achieve. And also it helps, as a storyteller, it helps to see other people's faces, to see their reactions as you are telling the story, because we're doing this on Zoom and nothing really beats doing it in person. But anything we can do to recreate that in-person feel is going to be really, really important. Now, another thing that I like to do, and this is something that I used to do in a storytelling event that I used to run before COVID. I ran a storytelling event called Talk Story. We would have storytellers each give their tell their story, and then if they wanted to, they could either just finish their story and that would be it, or they could ask for feedback. They can ask the audience to give reactions, affirmations, and only if they request it. If they request critique, then only critique. But if they request just general responses, then we try and keep those responses to either your own reactions or to positive affirmations, and to truly try not to criticize or critique unless the storyteller specifically asks for critique. Because we want to keep this a safe space. We want all the stories and the things that are revealed in this space to stay in this space, not to leave it. And we really don't want to judge folks for revealing their own personal feelings. This is because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to do this in front of other people. So if you're interested in sharing a story, one of the things I recommend you do is, if you sign up for a slot and you pick your story, you see the theme, you pick your story, is practice in front of a mirror. Take some time to practice your story in front of a mirror, not just to get the words out and to practice saying the words, but to see what happens when you tell the story to yourself. And what I mean by that is, as you tell your story, see what emotions come up in you. See if your story makes you smile. See if your story makes you laugh. See if your story makes you cry. Because if you don't feel anything as you tell your story, then the audience isn't going to feel anything either. And if you want your audience to feel something, or if you want your audience to validate your feelings, then you must be able to be emotionally honest in your story as you tell it. So that's my presentation. I thank you all for listening. I'm going to unshare right now, and we're going to go ahead and open up to questions. We've got a few minutes left. So are there any questions about what we just talked about there? I know I threw a lot at you.
Annabelle, have you been keeping track of the questions? Do you want to go ahead and go through it? Otherwise, one of us can.
Oh, I wasn't even looking at the chat.
Annabelle, yep, floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of questions. I'm
Annabelle, you're cutting out.
Can you ask it, because I think I'm having mic problems.
No worries.
Oops.
Okay, so going through.
Let's see. Hold on.
I think one of the good questions that I did see in chat is about resharing the information in this session. So, like, for the slides that you provided, Ryan, what are the limitations that we do have? So, say like Lily wants to share it with her coworker because she found the session very informative. What, can she?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so what we'll actually be doing with this particular video is, because it's the kickoff and it provides the structure, we'll actually be posting it on our NAP San Jose YouTube page. So we'll be sending everybody who's participating in this the link afterwards that you're more than welcome to share. So starting with Teddy. Teddy had a question. Is the storytelling paradigm mentioned in the beginning prefers stories invoking mixed emotions over multiple short conversations that invoke one emotion at a time? It's kind of a complex question.
Yeah, Teddy, can you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned that when you tell stories, there's mixed emotions that involve through different hormones. And I was wondering, for a successful story, is
Oh,
it better
shoot.
to concentrate your content, focus on one emotion?
Ah, I see.
Right.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any one that is better than the other. Some stories are only happy stories, some stories are only sad stories. I think what I'm really getting at is that whatever it is, the story should sort of be relatable in the sense that it is really what you went through, really, what you experienced. And and that's naturally going to involve multiple emotions, I think. So my story, for example, about my uncle was just sort of kind of sad. And it didn't have a lot of other stuff going on in it, but it was true to me. It was true to my experience, and it was really what I, how I felt about the situation. So, and I think that that's just fine. Your story doesn't have to run the roller coaster of having joy and sadness and laughter and suspense and fear and all this stuff in order to be a good story. It just has to speak to the truth of who you are as a person.
And Teddy also had another follow-up question. Where and how do you break or shift?
Teddy, can you expand on that?
Yeah,
Break,
like
shift, where?
a story you tell about your uncle. So first you mentioned your uncle's life stories, and then there was a twist that later, after like the mention, you found out a lot of things. Like, I was wondering, like, given this particular example, can you generalize, or would you put I guess this is a very natural, organic twist, but if I were to put a twist, where would you suggest to put it?
Well, now we're getting into the details. In terms of, yeah, like sort of turning things around in your story, it's usually done in the second half. But it's really kind of open-ended. You can kind of play with it however you like. One of the things that I like to do is I actually like to preface my stories. So I like to give a sentence right at the beginning before I even get into the story. I tell people sort of what to expect, or I tell people something that might get revealed later on. Like one way that I would have done it with the story about my uncle, I would have said, this is a story about death. And then I would have gotten into my Uncle Calvin loved to tell stories, blah, blah, blah. And then, because then you have this notion of death in your mind. And then later on, in the second half of the story, I start to tell you about how he died. And then you're like, you have that callback and you're like, oh, that's what he mentioned at the beginning. Right. And so that's kind of a nice little thing that you can feed people later on in the story. Twists and turns, usually, yeah, sort of once you've established who we're talking about, the characters in the story and where we are, then you can start to throw in twists and turns and stuff. So it's like usually in the middle or the end of your story. But really, it's kind of up to you and how it feels.
Right, and
Oh.
you mentioned like giving the hint is so making sure there is a kind of structure or logical structure that the audience can expect, instead of like just doing all these like twists, surprise twists.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. You always want to stay on an actual narrative path. They've likened it to like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs through a forest. That's what storytelling is like, right? You don't want to give away the whole thing, and you also don't want to lead people astray. You want to lead them slowly on this winding path through the forest so that they can take those breadcrumbs and enjoy the scenery along the way. So what I mean by that is, yeah, don't get too wild and crazy with your twists and turns and stuff like that. The essential idea is to keep it simple, but don't give it all away.
Okay, Hannah had a question. She's got her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of the info. I find that is very helpful. And for me, I feel like I've done maybe a lot more of like on the entertaining side of the story that you're showing for the chart. And in a lot of ways, when I'm telling about like my parents or like my upbringing, a lot of it can be like triggering. And I think I've kind of fall into the default of maybe for my audience, don't want to make everyone feel uncomfortable. So a lot of it is kind of pitched in a way that's more humor based. So for mine, I've also was wondering of like, how do you adjust your stories kind of for your audience, and like whether it's more intimate setting or if it's, you know, a bigger crowd?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've found that what I naturally tend to do is that for a bigger audience, I tend to pare things down and make things much more simple and shorter. And because there's something about sitting in a large crowd of people that your attention span goes down for some reason. I'm not sure why, but when you're sitting in a just small room with just like 2 or 3 people, you'll listen to me talk for half an hour. So that's kind of how I adjust. But in terms of sort of revealing myself emotionally in front of a crowd, I think I don't really adjust for size with that, because I think it's actually, so yeah, you bring up a good point of like, you don't want to make anyone else feel uncomfortable. And that's a very good thing to do. But at the same time, what I'm talking about really is really sort of like turning inward and expressing yourself. And in doing so, I believe that, in doing so, you won't, well, not that you won't ever make anyone feel uncomfortable, but the chances are you're going to make most people in the room feel for you, whether or not it's a small group or a large crowd, because, and this is what I was getting at before, is that like truth is subjective, right? As we've been finding out with all the divisions in our country, nobody knows what's true nowadays, but emotions are always true for the person feeling them, right?
Got it.
So your emotions are true for you, and so the more you can just show that truth, no one can dispute it. No one can speak against it, because it's you, it's what you're feeling, it's how you feel, right? Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I think it's important to be careful, to not trigger folks, to choose carefully about what kind of language we use. But again, like your own feelings cannot, usually your own feelings don't offend, because they're your feelings, they are how you feel. So the more you can keep it about you and less about like making general opinions about the state of the world or about whatever subject it is, the more you can make it about you, then the less offensive it will be.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that is really helpful to know. And like for the smaller audience, I just find that like it's easier and I can kind of like adjust on the fly when I can see people's like immediate reactions than like if you're standing further back and you're spotlit and you can't see the people in the audience.
Yeah, I find that I come alive much more when I can see people's faces, and this is why doing it over Zoom is so difficult. But when I'm in a smaller room, I get much more animated, because I can actually I react to the reactions that I get in the room. There's this back and forth that happens that's, I think, actually rather magical and really wonderful when that happens, that you can't really get in a really big room full of people. You kind of have to just imagine what they're feeling in their seats, especially if there's like lights on you. It's even more difficult. You just have to go off of what you hear. You hear them kind of laughing, or you hear them, so that's hard. Yeah.
Natasha, did Ryan answer your relatability question?
I was going to say it was kind of a perfect segue into my question, and I think he touched on it well enough. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. See, next question was, yes, Jajan, go ahead.
Okay, hi, thank you. Hi, Ryan. I love what you shared today. It's refreshing, and it's easy to understand. I do have a question. So I realized, first of all, I want to go back a little bit. I didn't realize I have a lot of emotion from the past until early last year. So I've been in this emotion journey.
Yeah.
And then I also discovered that I'm type of person, I like to focus on big picture. I like to relate big picture. But a lot of other people, they are better when more details provided. So I'm in this, like, where do I find the fine line that I can be myself and also provide enough detail that others can connect?
Do you mean in terms of emotion? Like you brought
In
up
terms
how,
of sharing a story.
just in terms of sharing.
Uh-huh.
Well, so it's, you know, it's a question of big picture versus details.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's, yeah, I struggle with that myself, actually. I struggle with that myself because I'm also a big picture person. And I like to do things in broad strokes and talk about like grand plans and all this. Yeah, it's actually been kind of a lifelong journey for me to actually kind of try and slow down. And I've done a lot of work. This is where I actually get, you know, really kind of get into the sort of therapy aspect or the healing aspect of this, in that I've had to do a lot of work to actually slow down and feel the things that I've been feeling.
Mhm.
I've had to learn how to feel my own feelings. This is something that a lot of
Yes.
people already know how to do, but I've had to actually learn how to like stop and experience what is going on inside of my body. So the more that I've been able to do that, the more that I've been able to practice these exercises. You know, there's all kinds of exercises that can be done, these like sort of psychosomatic exercises, self-soothing exercises to actually register the emotions that are happening and then log them or catalog them in my mind. It helps to actually like sit there, experience them, and sort of speak them out loud. I am feeling this. I am feeling something, a tingle going down my spine. I'm feeling heat going into my cheeks. I'm feeling I'm feeling this because I'm angry or because I am upset about what happened, or I'm very, very sad, or whatever it is. And connecting those physical feelings to the emotions that I'm experiencing, and then speaking it out loud to myself, just by myself alone in a room.
Mhm.
That's like foundational stuff. That's like setting the foundation for being able to then properly communicate my experiences in a bigger format, in sort of more of a storytelling format or a writing format, right? Because then once I'm able to do that, when I practice that a lot, then I can go back to certain experiences that I've had, and I can replay those in my mind, and I can figure out what I was feeling at the time. I can create that narrative path of what happened, and then I can start to make it clearer in my mind and make it easier to then recite and then tell other people. So it's a matter of like really slowing down, turning inward, doing that healing work that we can, you know, on our own, and then sharing that with people. And it's hard. It's very difficult to share that with people because, you know, again, like putting that into words is difficult. And then of course, getting up in front of people and sharing it is extremely difficult. But anything you can do to really tap that and to, and again, this is where I think, you know, telling your story in the mirror is really important, because if you are able to tell your story and then get that little feeling of something right here in your chest, and you notice it and you log it and you're like, oh, that's something there that's happening, that's actually happening, then you know that's a point, that's a very important point in your story. That's going to resonate with the people who are listening to you, right? So I think it's really about like, you know, hitting those points of emotional reaction inside of yourself, logging them in your mind, knowing that those are the points where you react in your story, and then trying to really take the time, take your time with those points in your story, right? Don't gloss over them. Really kind of slow down and let yourself even like literally slow down, like talk slower even during those points, because we tend to talk really, really fast when we're telling stories, especially to strangers. We get nervous that people don't want to listen to us, and so we try to get through it really quickly so that they don't have to listen to us anymore. right? And we get really nervous. But if you take the time to actually slow down your speech, literally slow down how fast you're talking, especially during those emotional points, you will feel it more, and it will become more real to you in that moment, and it will become more real to the people who are listening to you. That's how you really sort of zoom in and magnify on those points. And that's, I think that'll help you really go from a big picture down to a detail-oriented kind of story.
Thank you. Slow down and practicing in front of the mirror.
Slow down, practice, hit those emotional points inside of yourself. Really, really feel them. Really take the time to feel them. Don't gloss over them. Don't speed through.
Love it. I have one quick question. How long did it take you to process process the emotion? I'm just curious. If you don't want to answer, it's okay.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I'm still doing it. It's an ongoing journey for me. I mean, so I told this whole story about my Uncle Calvin. Well, you know, he was like that. He told entertaining stories. He never told stories that had any feeling. Well, guess what? I'm related to him. It runs in the family. So I'm a talker. I talk a lot, and I found myself doing the exact same thing that he did. I would tell stories about fluff, about stuff that didn't matter, just to entertain, just to get people to like me, so that, you know, I'd be the life of the party, whatever. I did that for like decades and decades, and it wasn't until I would say maybe in the last 5-10 years, after a number of painful, I'd say painful relationships and breakups, that I that I realized that I had a lot going on inside of here that I wasn't sharing with anybody. I wasn't actually. And then, you know, I think there was a few people, maybe some friends, who even told me, they're like, yeah, you know, I don't really know much about you, actually. You know, we drink a lot and we hang out a lot, but I don't know who you are. And I realized that I was doing the same thing that my uncle did. And I sort of took a vow to not be like him, to learn from his mistakes. But it's super hard. It's very, very difficult work, that, for me at least, it's very difficult for me. And it's involved a lot of, well, it's involved a lot of therapy and a lot of, group therapy and actually focusing on this work. And I see my storytelling as part of my own personal therapy, actually. So every time I tell a story, it is helping me work through some kind of issue or some kind of, deeply rooted thing that I have going on. My relationship with my uncle and other things, right? So every story that you tell is an opportunity to actually work something out in your own mind, work something out emotionally in your own mind. And so I think you should take it as that, take it as an opportunity to actually, if you have somebody's ear, if somebody's actually listening, boom, you've got, people pay for that, right? People pay for the ability to have someone to listen to them. And so if you've got an audience, share. And, we're also nervous about sharing. We don't want anybody to think ill of us. But the funny thing is that the more you share, the more people can connect with you. We've always been sort of like, I don't know where we got this idea that if I share emotionally, that everybody's going to shun me and everybody's going to hate me. It's actually the complete opposite. The more you share, the more you allow people to connect with you.
So
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ryan. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So Natasha had to drop off, but she did have one more question that I think is actually kind of important.
Sure.
How do you recommend structuring your notes as an aid? We've been talking about, the types of things to talk about and how you talk about that, but how do you actually prepare for the actual storytelling?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, everybody prepares differently. I mean, I actually don't take notes. I'm not a note taker. I'm very sort of like all in my mind. And again, like with this, with a lot of these psychosomatic exercises I've been doing, everything is about how I feel, how it makes me feel. So I've been really just sort of like focusing on that. And every time I tell a story, I'd literally, and this is why I recommended the mirror thing, is that I would do that. I would get in front of a mirror and I would tell the story just over and over and over again until it felt comfortable, until I could actually feel those emotional points along the way. But, not everybody works like that. And I think you kind of have to figure out the best way that works for you. But again, it's all about hitting that emotional honesty, being emotionally honest with yourself. Whatever way you can do that. Some people prefer to do that in a journal. Some people prefer to do that, maybe you record yourself and then watch it back or something like that. There's all different kinds of ways. Or you find a trusted friend, someone who you really, feel comfortable with, and you sit with them and you tell them the story and you get feedback from them. It really sort of, you got to find what works for you.
Okay, and I think that is all the time that we have. Noelle, do you want to close things out?
All right.
Sure. First off, of course, thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. As I wrote in the chat, Ryan will be joining us for future events to help with feedback and guiding in the storytelling process. So for everybody who's still on this chat and hearing this recording, I hope that you gleaned as much as your brains can handle right now. This is a series because this is a lot. Right? It's a lot to consider. It's a lot of emotional, feelings that a lot of people did share can happen during storytelling. So thank you so much again, Ryan, for guiding us through that process. A few quick reminders. I did throw in the chat our link tree that is now live. Our link tree is connected to our Instagram and has all of our links for our websites, and we'll have all the events. Also, what I mentioned on the chat is this series will have a sign up in a series format. Right now, we just have this one, the intro, but you will be getting more information via email after this event to sign up for the rest of the series. We also dropped in the chat the Google Sheet to sign up. I saw that Teddy signed up for everyone. I love that. So please sign up on that sheet so we make sure to make time to have you try your hand at storytelling. We definitely encourage everyone to please try. If you feel comfortable, when you feel comfortable, we will meet you where you are when you feel comfortable to try your hand at a couple minutes story, 5 minutes or less. And like I said, Ryan will be there to guide us, as well as the rest of the NAP San Jose leadership team. If you do sign up on the sheet, that does not necessarily guarantee you a spot, but of course we will prioritize. Please also register for the event. Also, last closing notes, our next event is in person. As I mentioned at the beginning, it will be a hump day dinner at Seapot in San Mateo. That is available for sign up right now. Sorry, I'm in a public space. That will be available for sign up. It is available now for sign up for San Mateo. If you are in the area or would like to join us for an area dinner, we would love to meet you and see you in person. All information is on our NAP, NAAP San Jose website, and we will be sending you that information as well, and you can see it from the link tree. I will drop it again in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I ran over time, but we are so thankful for everyone who joined us, and we are uber thankful for Ryan to be able to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you signing on and sticking with us, even though we ran long. Have a good day.